Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're having chance of connecting business project management and humanitarian project management worlds thanks to this conference and supporting to disaster victims. As we gather here today, we want to express our gratitude for your participation again. Please don't forget to donate to support earthquake victims. Our first speaker has been working more than 25 years in the field of humanitarian aid. PMI Turkey volunteer Ünsal Atasoy will host Ms. Sema Genel Karaosmanoglu. Welcome, Ünsal.
Thank you.
So the stage is yours. I hope you will have a good conversational speech and will support victims of earthquake.
Thank you so much for inviting to be moderator for this session. Hello, everybody. This is Ünsal from PMI Turkey chapter. I am volunteering at PMI Turkey for nearly 5 years. You know, the earthquake, it was a huge shock for us, and it showed us how vulnerable we are against the nature. Of course, after the disaster, we are trying to recover by all means. Thanks to PMI and all PMI Europe chapters and all partners and all volunteers, today we are here to help our community. As I said, I'm the moderator for the session, and I would like to introduce our special guest to you. Then I will leave the stage to her. Sema has been working in the field of humanitarian aid. Welcome, Sema. I'm just introducing you. For over 26 years, she has carried out project work in India, Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, and now focuses on work inside Turkey. In 2005, Sema became the founder and the director of Hayata Destek Support to Life, a humanitarian aid organization with headquarters in Istanbul, Turkey. In addition to emergency relief and recovery work, Support to Life is involving in protection and resilience work for displaced population. With a PhD degree in political science and public administration, Sema has lectured in a number of universities in Istanbul. First of all, we really appreciate the devoted efforts of the Support to Life Association to heal the wounds after this devastating earthquake in our country. Thank you so much and accepting our invitation for the event. So I'm leaving stage to you.
Thank you very much, Ünsal. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. So my name is Sema, and I'm currently the director of Support to Life, Hayata Destek. And I will talk about the humanitarian sector as a sector. It's a very specialized area of work. And there are quite a number of different actors, humanitarian actors. So I speak from a civil society perspective, from a non-governmental organization, an NGO, as we say in the sector. But before, I will briefly talk about what we have been doing as Support to Life related to the recent earthquake response. But before that, I would like to share with you an overview of the humanitarian sector, of the work we do, how we do it, and the project management cycle briefly. So I will do that, and then hopefully we will have a brief Q&A for some interaction and discussion. Okay, I guess I would have to, sorry about that. I turn this into a slideshow. Okay. So yes, I will talk about the project cycle management in the humanitarian aid sector. So quickly about the scope of the work we do in humanitarian aid. And basically, we are talking about a response to a humanitarian crisis. And a humanitarian crisis can be a result of a natural disaster, such as an earthquake, a flooding, or a forest fire, or it can be a conflict situation or or a human-made crisis, we say. So a conflict that leads to war usually, and conflict situations are usually they go on for long periods of time. The United Nations estimates an average of 17 years once a war breaks out, and for the humanitarian assistance to continue. So basically, humanitarian assistance is looking at sudden onset disasters, very acute ones like the one we have currently in Turkey with the earthquake, or complex emergencies where we have a war situation and plus a disaster on top, which in fact in Turkey we've had with the war in Syria, we actually have quite a large number of refugees, and the refugees are mainly populated in the border area between Turkey and Syria. And we already had a refugee response program going on. And on top of it now, we have an earthquake situation. And then when these crises go on for a long time, then we call them protracted crises. And oftentimes we say forgotten crises, because there are still crises going on in many parts of the world still today, but they're no longer in the media, they're no longer in our attention, but they are continuing crisis situations. So humanitarian aid is actually covers a very broad area, and it can go on for a very long time. And the ultimate aim is to bring people back to normalcy, to the situation that they were in before the disaster, before the crisis hit. So in the initial weeks, months, we call it a survival aid, because the idea is whoever has been pulled out from under the rubble in an earthquake situation, we try to make sure that they stay alive and that they cover their most basic needs. And it's about alleviating suffering, because it's not just about having lost our homes and our schools and our infrastructure, but it's also about psychological well-being, because it is a traumatic situation and there is a lot of psychological damage as well. So it's about alleviating that suffering on all fronts. And the basic idea is to maintain a certain level of human dignity and access to rights, because in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we know that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and in rights. So the objective is to bring back those the access to our basic rights. And now, when we look at the sectors in humanitarian aid, in fact, the government or governments are the ultimate responsibles, of course, for responding and rebuilding and bringing back to normalcy. However, a crisis situation is an overwhelming situation. So oftentimes governments and host agencies and other actors in country are not able to cope on their own. So we have a plethora of organizations and agencies that actually move in at times of crisis. There are other donor governments who mainly channel funding, because oftentimes there are resources needed. So there are big amounts of funds and grants channeled to the region. We see the Red Cross and the Red Crescent organizations. Each country has one, and then we have the IFRC, the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. So this is a network that works only on humanitarian response. And then we have the UN agencies. We have a lot of different United Nations agencies that are very specialized and work on the different components of a response. And we have non-governmental organizations. These are sometimes international organizations. So they have a network. Some are global networks, and they have a presence in many countries around the world where we have crises going on. We have national organizations, non-governmental organizations, local ones, and then we have the very community-based and the more grassroots ones. So there's quite a diversity of non-governmental actors also who are engaged in a crisis. And then we have the non-humanitarian stakeholders that usually become a part of a crisis. We have academia, we have heard from them, we have the private sector, who of course has the resources to be able to respond. So oftentimes they're able to channel quite a bit of funding and quite a bit of volunteers, actually. It's not only financial resources, but also human resources that are channeled into a crisis setting. So we come across a variety of different actors. Now, if we look at the formal humanitarian system and how that was established, currently, like I said, the IFRC is the largest humanitarian network, and they were established in 1919. They have a headquarters in Geneva, and at the moment they have 190 national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. And the emblems we see for the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, they actually are a symbol of neutrality of medical staff, because in the first instance, medical assistance, medical attention is very much needed in a crisis situation, and so it's important that medical staff are there only for those who are in need of assistance. And this has actually been the start of the humanitarian principles, as we call it, and I'm going to talk about that in a while. If we look at the chronology, then we see international NGOs that have popped up over time in response to crises, because we have crisis situations ongoing, and they're usually ongoing at different parts of the world at different times. So non-governmental organizations have then become global and international in their response. You might be familiar with organizations like Save the Children, Oxfam, Catholic Relief Services, CARE, World Vision, MSF is Doctors Without Borders. So these are some of the top players, and we have many dozens of these international organizations. And then the United Nations kick in after the Second World War, where we see UNICEF focused on children's needs. Specifically, we have WHO, the World Health Organization. We have UNHCR that looks specifically at displaced populations, because almost all crises lead to displaced people and communities. Sometimes these are displaced internally in a country, but many times people are displaced across borders and they become refugees. So there's an agency specifically looking at that. We have the WFP, the World Food Program. We have OCHA, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, because when you have such a big crisis and so many different actors coming in and so much funding flowing in, the United Nations realized we need to coordinate all this. So there's a body just specifically looking at the coordination of humanitarian action. And we have seen actually an increased media attention to humanitarian crises starting from the 1970s. It was actually the 1980s and the Band-Aid and the Live Aid and the charity concerts, for me, was one of the reasons why I became a humanitarian worker, because I wanted to go and do this work in other parts of the world as well. So since then, we do find a lot of media attention on crises. And of course, linked to that, there has been increased funding also available for humanitarian aid operations, because especially if crises are huge, there are big needs, and many people are affected. So it takes a lot of funding and a lot of grants to actually cover, to meet the needs that are out there. Again, when we go down the line in 1994, we've seen the Rwanda genocide. And this was actually a turning point for humanitarian action, because in a very short period of time, we had almost 1 million people killed, Rwandans killed, and 2 million were displaced and became refugees. And the humanitarian aid community kind of looked at themselves and they said, how are we doing this work? What are we doing? Are we really able to cover the needs? Are we really able to create an impact? And that was when the community realized we need to have some standards and some principles in place to be able to do this. So the humanitarian principles became official around this time. And now we have a code of conduct, which is very important for people and organizations that are involved in an emergency response, that they abide by a certain code of conduct. And the word quality came up in the humanitarian world because, of course, there needs to be a standard of quality to the aid that we deliver. So this became quite an important issue. And in 97, we saw the minimum standards appearing for humanitarian work. And since then, since 97, the sphere standards, as we call them, they have evolved quite a bit over time. So about the principles, currently we have 5 main principles in humanitarian work, or at least those who are looking at doing this work more professionally. They abide by the humanitarian principles. And humanity is the first one. Like I said, we are trying to reach out to everyone equally, and we're trying to maintain a certain level of dignity for all people affected. Impartiality is an important one, the non-discrimination principle. So whoever is, irrespective of who is affected, we have to be impartial in our assistance. Independence is an important one. As you saw, there are many, many actors. There are also various government actors, non-government actors, but also military groups, militia, especially in a setting, in a conflict setting. We have a lot of armed groups that are present on the ground. So it's very important that we keep our independence as humanitarian organizations, and we're there just solely for the purpose of delivering aid. Neutrality, again, is an important one, that we don't get pulled in by other organizations to doing work other than our humanitarian imperative. And accountability is an important one because there's a lot of funding coming in, and many of them are grants, so they are delivered just for the purposes of operations that alleviate suffering. But of course, then we have to account for what we do with the money that comes in, with the funding that comes in. So that's also a very important one. And like I said, all these principles were actually formalized in the Code of Conduct, which was officialized by the Federation, the IFRC, in 94. Just about the standards quickly. So the sphere standards have evolved quite a bit since 97. And now we have different chapters. We have one on water supply, sanitation, and hygiene. So at times of crisis, if our water supplies are affected, we need to secure a hygienic environment. And the work we do in this area, again, has certain minimum standards that we need to abide by. Food security, nutrition, food aid is another important one, because people need food to keep alive after a crisis. And everything that we do under this heading, again, has minimum standards. Shelter and settlement is an important one. What kind of space, what kind of shelters do we provide? And usually these are temporary settlements for a while until permanent structures are back in place. So, having the standards, the minimum living space per family in a camp environment or in a temporary settlement environment is an important one. Non-food items, usually they are there to support the shelter needs. We need beds and blankets and household items and other goods to be able to maintain a certain level of dignity, plus health services. So health is an important one, and it's not only the primary healthcare services, but it's also about mental health and psychosocial support services. So we talk about the humanitarian imperative. So when there is a crisis, it is our obligation as humanitarian actors to be there, to be present, and to alleviate suffering. But we have to do this based on a do no harm principle, because oftentimes when we try to deliver assistance, we need to be careful that we're not providing more harm. We need to take care of the cultural dynamics, of the local dynamics, and our way of doing things has to be well adjusted to whatever is locally appropriate in that particular setting. And all these standards have actually now been compiled to what we call the core humanitarian standard, the CHS. This is the main quality and accountability standard for humanitarian action. Of course, we're looking at a wide range of things that we do in humanitarian aid. And all these program areas are in fact called sectors. And like I said, as we cluster the different types of work that we do, we also detail our programming under these sectoral headings. So we run programs as humanitarian organizations. We run health and nutrition programs. We run shelter and NFI programs. We run WASH programs. Food security and livelihoods is another important one. Temporary settlement support, which is currently very important for the earthquake in Turkey, for example. We have over 2,000 temporary settlements. Some formal, but most of them, about 70%, are informal settlements. So that's quite a big area of work, identifying these settlements and providing for all the needs, both infrastructure and other needs. Protection is an important one, because at times of crisis, there is the tendency for violence to increase. So it's important that we keep a close eye on violence, and especially against children, child protection. And it's basically about access to rights, especially if populations have had to cross borders, then they also have lost all their rights. So it's about securing a legal framework, a legal infrastructure for people to be able to access what they have lost as a result of the crisis. And education, again, of course, is a very, very important one, because for children especially, getting back to their routine is a very, very important one after a crisis. Also to help them overcome their trauma, because children are particularly affected by trauma. So education is a very, very key sector. But then we have also cross-cutting themes. We call them our areas of responsibility as humanitarian actors. And we need to make sure that as we are delivering all this aid, we need to protect affected populations from sexual exploitation and abuse. Perhaps you have heard this is a big thing in the sector, something that we're very, very careful about, because as we deliver aid, we're actually delivering something, but we don't do this in exchange for anything. And unfortunately, there has been some abuse of this in the aid sector. So we are particularly sensitive about this issue. Also, gender-sensitive programming is an important one, because the needs of children, of girls and boys, of women, of men, of other groups can be very different, and we need to acknowledge that we are sensitive about how we do our programming. Diversity and inclusion is an important one. There are many, many different groups that are affected by crises and affected in a different way. So it's important that we are aware and that we include them into our programming. Child safeguarding is an important one. Again, the do no harm. Children can be particularly vulnerable at times of crisis. So really safeguarding their needs and their priorities is an important one. And finally, of course, climate is becoming a big thing also in the humanitarian sector. As the aid community, we are looking at how is climate change impacting us, and how can we better sensitivize our programming so that we reduce greenhouse emissions, and that we have a safe, climate safe programming as well. So we look at the project cycle in a humanitarian crisis situation. So we call it the response cycle. And basically, we start with an identification of the needs. This brings an understanding of the context, what the scale of the damage has been, and we link to the needs that are there. We need to have an understanding of the different stakeholders that are there. also the risks involved within that particular context. So first we do an analysis and an assessment of the situation. And then we identify the particular risk groups, the most vulnerable. It's especially important that we reach out to those who need assistance the most. So identification of the risk groups is an important step in our project cycle. And then once we have a clear understanding of our context and the external environment, and then we look at what are the needs and what can we do. So what kind of an intervention can we design? And this is basically about designing a project, and it's about coming up with a proposal of what we intend to do in that particular situation and how we intend to do it. So it's about putting that into a log frame. We call it the logical framework of what kind of activities we will conduct and what that will serve. So what kind of an impact, what kind of an outcome we will achieve, and of course how much money we need to do that. So we need to put together a budget of how much financial resources we need to be able to do that, together of course with a work plan. And the ideal is to be able to design projects with community participation, especially for organizations like NGOs, like non-governmental organizations. We work very closely with affected populations. So it's very important that we sit together with them and design our interventions together. This also is a guarantee that we are being accountable with the resources that are being given to us to be able to cover needs. And then in the cycle, the next step is the intervention itself. So the implementation, whatever implementation that might be. It might be a very quick and acute, a quick intervention to cover the very immediate needs. This could be delivering in-kind relief goods or cash assistance, but it could also be more medium-term planning, looking at recovery. So how do we, once we meet the very initial, the initial needs, how do we look at recovering from the situation? And then, of course, there's the much longer-term planning. We look at building resilience, and we do it through empowerment of affected communities themselves. And this is a phase where we're also preparing for crises. So how can we learn from what we have lived through, and how can we better prepare for other emergencies, for other crises? And as we do this, we actually go through a grant management process as well, because once we do get the funding in, then we need to be able to manage that, looking at our work plans, our budgets, and our log frames. And of course, we close the cycle with a monitoring, evaluation, and a lessons learned. Monitoring, of course, we do throughout the entire project cycle, an evaluation at the end, or we could do a mid if this is a longer term planning, but looking at what kind of an impact are we creating or have we created. And of course, the lessons learned of if we are to redo this again, because of course crises go on for a long time and there are many various project cycles. So looking at what we've done and how we can improve our intervention for the next cycle. So this was about the overall, the sector, along with how we manage projects, but briefly about my organization. So at Support to Life, we have been doing this work since 2005, so for 18 years now. We are Turkey-based. We have our headquarters in Istanbul, and we work mostly in Turkey. Since the crisis broke out in Syria, our refugee support program has been our largest program since 2012. So it's been more than 10 years now. We have been running programs with refugees, but we have also intervened in crises in neighboring countries. So we've also worked outside the country, but we're mainly Turkey focused. And because we're a humanitarian organization, we work in all the different sectors, depending on what the needs are. And we are our basic objective is to cover those needs and to facilitate access to services. And when we look at the earthquake currently, of course, this has become a huge humanitarian operation for us. And we are active currently in the 4 main sectors of shelter and NFI, in water supply, sanitation, and hygiene. In fact, these 2 are still today, 50 days, more than 50 days into the earthquake. Wash needs and shelter are still the top priority. And food aid, we do both in kind and cash, depending on whether markets have started operating. Because in humanitarian assistance, more and more we see cash programming, because we feel this is a more dignified way of covering needs instead of delivering kits and parcels and baskets of goods. And finally, mental health and psychosocial support is a very important one. And already prior to the earthquake, we had large teams of psychologists, social workers, and psychosocial support staff, because linked to our refugee program, we were dealing with traumas related to the war and related to displacement. So this is again quite a big focus for our work in the earthquake region. And my final slide, since the day of the earthquake, since the 6th, we have reached out to a large number of people. That's because we work on 4 different sectors, but also we are a relatively large national NGO. We had 320 staff, plus many community volunteers. And we were actually active in this region, in the earthquake hit region, because we had offices and we had teams in provinces that were, heavily populated by refugees. And this is precisely the area that was hit. So we already had teams on the ground. Of course, many of them were affected themselves by the earthquake, but now they are recovering and they're joining the response efforts. And so we've been working with large teams in a variety of different sectors. I believe this is it. Thank you very much for listening, and I will get back to yes.
Thank you so much. It was an invaluable presentation, and we get many insights and information from that slide. Let's go with questions. There seems to be a diversity of humanitarian actors. How do the different stakeholders interact with each other?
Coordination is a very important thing when it comes to a crisis situation and crisis management. And in fact, the humanitarian sector, the humanitarian community has realized this, and there is one United Nations agency specifically focusing on coordination. But of course, beyond coordination, the community has also realized that instead of each organization doing their own thing, for example, needs assessment is something that all organizations need to do. They need to understand the situation and the needs to be able to design their programming. So there have been, for example, joint needs assessments now that are ongoing. Several agencies coming together, or the United Nations also facilitating an assessment of the needs and sharing this with the wider community. So there are partnerships also, because there are organizations that are bringing in funding. There are organizations that are active on the ground and they're ready to respond. So partnerships is again an important feature. So the system is finding ways of working with each other effectively.
Thank you. Next question. How can you ensure systematic project management in such a crisis environment? It is somehow highly agile and complex, chaotic environment.
Yes, it is. It is actually, and agility is in fact very important. And interestingly, although this is not a term that we use in the civil society sector, especially for humanitarian aid, we have been coming across organizations looking at more agile ways of doing things, and this is absolutely very important, because the system, in fact, as I have described it, has high standards, it has principles, and it has heavy accountabilities, because we are talking about large amounts of funding being pulled into crisis situations, and a diversity of organizations making use of that funding. But of course, we need to account for every single penny that we use, because we are taking this as a grant, and we need to be able to explain this. So the accountability standards are quite strict, and unfortunately, because of this, some actors are left out of the system, because you need to have a certain level of credibility and the internal systems and mechanisms in place to be able to manage such a systematic structure of project management. And this is, in one way, actually something that pulls us back from quickly responding, because in a crisis situation, we need to be able to respond very quickly. And interestingly, in the initial days and even weeks, there are a lot of other diverse groups that come in, and they're much more agile in their response. We have volunteer groups coming in. We have private sector, channeling funds. We have the more philanthropic organizations that quickly kick in and are able to respond until a more systematic programming comes into place.
Thank you so much. Next question, please. Yeah. What would be the typical project management team for a humanitarian organization?
Well, of course, first the project cycle starts with developing the concept. So it's more of a design and a development team that initially works on the intervention, and then once that's decided, and once the funding is secured, because we also have to look at funding opportunities, and once the funding is secured, then we have a project management team, and this is very field based. So those that are actually delivering the assistance, and who are actually carrying out the work. So we have our main project management is at the field level, and of course we have support functions that support the project management at the field level. So we have we do our recruitments, we procure our goods, we deliver them. We have social workers, field workers. We have a specific staff on the ground. And then we have usually these are called meal teams, the monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and the learning. So they need to be there as a part of the project management, because we need to have a close look on what we are delivering, how we are delivering, the impact, and whether we are open to feedback from the community, if we're also engaging the community. So that's an important one. And plus, we have our sector experts. I talked about the different sectors, and they each have their specific standards and ways of doing things. So then we also need to have that sectoral expertise as a part of the project management team.
Thank you so much. And another question from Barret Binatlı. What are the main challenges you face during the monitoring phase of your project? How do you overcome them?
As humanitarian organizations, we do have our monitoring and evaluation mechanisms in place. And depending on need, we have used also different softwares for this. For example, in our refugee support program, we were looking at case management. So looking at particular vulnerable cases and referring them to relevant institutions, or providing individual protection assistance ourselves. So for our case management monitoring, we actually had to develop a certain program, a software for ourselves, and it makes life easy, of course, when we do have certain programs that help us with the monitoring and evaluation. In fact, this is an important one, because in the humanitarian sector, we work with big amounts of funding, because this is a sector, especially if you're doing this at a certain at a certain professional level, with the standards and the principles. You need to have a system where you are managing large numbers, you are reaching out to a large number of people. So the monitoring, in fact, can be quite a challenge. So we use different tools to cover the different needs.
Thank you so much. We run out of time, and thank you for your invaluable information and insights. It was very good to see the project management in action. I hope it will heal our worlds, and thank you for devoted efforts for this.
Thank you very much, Insal. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.